Okay, we'll make a start. We put the first, thank you. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's ESRC session on assessing and building city level readiness for climate action. There's no dispute that climate change is happening and very little debate on what we need to do to reduce carbon emissions. There are also plenty of tools and methods for monitoring carbon reduction actions. Where there is less agreement, however, is on how ready we are as a society to take these actions. What are the obstacles to climate action and what do we need to do to overcome them? This evening's session will draw on the experience here in Leeds carried out by the Leeds Climate Commission. The process has involved participatory workshops throughout the summer to identify how ready Leeds as a city is to take action in different sectors of the economy and to identify strategic interventions needed to build climate readiness. This is the programme for this evening. We will start with a presentation on the readiness assessment process from Professor Andy Gouldson of University of Leeds, who chairs the Leeds Climate Commission. And this will be followed by a series of short 5-minute responses from our distinguished panel. Councillor Lisa Mulherin, Executive Board Member for Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development at Leeds City Council and Vice Chair of the Leeds Climate Commission. Andy Boyle, founder of Otley Energy, set up in 2019 to design business and finance models to accelerate the transformation to a sustainable, low carbon and inclusive economy. Johnny Wilson, Development Director at Citu, a sustainable urban property developer which creates amazing places with thoughtful design and sustainable technology. And Jamie Saye, co-founder of Sustainable Arts in Leeds, a social enterprise aimed at bringing the cultural and creative sectors of Leeds together to combat climate change. We will then open it up for questions from the audience. My name is Tom Knowland, and it's my job to make sure we get through all of this and that we finish at 8:30 p.m. Can I have the next slide? So there are the usual Zoom rules for everyone to follow. We'll have all the presentations first and then the questions and answers and discussion. So please stay on mute unless you are asked to speak. Please use the Q&A function on your screens to pose your questions to the panel, and you can also vote for questions that you would like to see asked. You can also engage on social media, and there's the various hashtags and so forth there on the screen for you to use. So if I could ask all the other panelists to switch off their videos and for Andy Gouldson to unmute and give the first presentation. I'll give you a 5-minute and 1-minute warning, Andy. So if you could imagine a virtual round of applause, and then the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for joining us. It's a shame we can't be doing this face-to-face and catching up, hopefully sometime soon. So I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes now on what we've been doing over the summer to assess how ready Leeds is to act on climate change. One of the first and most obvious questions is how urgent is this? How quickly do we need to act? Leeds has a share of the global carbon budget, which is about 31 million tonnes. So that is, when we look at what we think we can emit globally, in order to stay within the 1.5 degree threshold and then divide it by population, that's what we as a city get as our share. That doesn't take into account historical emissions. It's just a simple division of the global total by population. When we look at what we're emitting now, we're emitting about 4 million tonnes a year just through our scope 1 and 2, or our direct carbon footprint. So that doesn't include some important things all to do with our consumption. So actually it may be higher than that. But if we take 4 million as our base load, then that means we will have used up our share of the global carbon budget by 2029. That is a stark number, and it really focuses the mind in terms of how quickly we need to act and the level of ambition and the rate of change that we need to be thinking of to deliver on that, or to stay within our carbon budget. And as a city, we have set ourselves a target to reach or to work towards net zero by 2030. So we have to be ready pretty quickly if we're not ready now. What we've done then is to ask exactly that question. How ready are we to act in different areas? And initially we focused on 4 key sectors: housing, commercial buildings, the public sector in general, including the council and the NHS and other government buildings and the universities and so on, and transport. And between them, those 4 sectors account for 84% of our scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint. So really the majority of our direct impacts are associated with these sectors, and therefore we need to be ready to act and ready to go in terms of accelerating decarbonisation of these key sectors. So what we did was to set up a series of participatory workshops with key stakeholders from across the city. And we focused on the 4 sectors I just put up. And last week, fantastically, we also started to look at this with a focus on the cultural sector. And Jamie will be talking about that a little later. So far we've run 9 workshops, each with about 20 stakeholders in it. And for each sector, we asked 2 key questions. In the first workshop, we asked, how ready are we to act? And I'll explain what we mean by that in a second. And in the second workshop, we said, okay, what do we need to do to improve our readiness to act? So where are the priorities for building our capacity so that we can get going on this decarbonisation journey? And by readiness, we break it down into 5 different categories or aspects of readiness. The first one is to do with technical readiness. So here we ask whether we have the technologies and the behaviours needed to reduce energy use and our carbon footprints, and are they ready to deploy now? We then ask about policy readiness. Do we have the policies and plans needed to support delivery of these measures, whether locally in Leeds or regionally in West Yorkshire or nationally at the UK scale? Then we ask about funding and investment and ask how ready we are to actually invest in these low carbon options. Are the funds available? Are there investable options? Do we have the business models all ready to be deployed? And then we ask about community readiness, whether from the actual community or from the business community. We ask whether we have support and buy-in from the public or from the business community or from some sectors of the city. And then lastly, we ask, do we have the skills and the supply chains and the organisations needed to deliver all of this change? Bearing in mind that there could be some intensive activity to deliver the kind of transformations in housing or transport, for example, that we will need over the next decade. So those are the main categories of readiness. And we then ask about how ready people think we are across 3 levels of ambition. So the lowest level of ambition is, we take that to mean readiness to reduce our energy use and carbon emissions in the city by 40% between now and 2030. And a medium level of ambition is readiness to reduce carbon footprints by 60%, and the high level of ambition is to do that by 90% between now and 2030. So we've got 3 different levels of ambition, and we ask people for each level to assign a score for how ready they think we are, where 1 is completely unready and 5 is completely ready. And in this way, we gradually build up a map, if you like, or a landscape of readiness across different aspects of different sectors and across different levels of ambition for the city. And from there, we then develop this kind of way of presenting the results. So the lowest, sorry, the circle in the middle shows the average level of readiness. And then for the low level, it's the lowest set of segments in the middle. And for the middle, obviously the middle level of ambition, and for the high level of ambition, it's the outer circle. And for each of the different aspects of readiness, the scores are there. And what this allows us to do is to highlight the areas where we're least ready. In other words, those where there are blockages which are preventing us from acting. So what we're going to do now is present the results of the analysis for housing. which is the main focus probably for the conversation tonight. And I'll also, just for comparison, present the results for transport. We do have the full results ready for the commercial sector and for public sector as well, and we can circulate those to you if you're interested. But for now, just to focus on housing. So these are the aggregate scores for the whole of the housing sector. So in the middle, we have the lowest score is where we're least ready to act. And as you can see, the lowest score there is 2.0. The numbers are a little bit irrelevant. It's a kind of qualitative consensus-based process. So it's, you know, shouldn't put too much sway in the actual numbers. But the lowest level that we have is for 2. So that's not very ready, largely unready to act for housing. But then across different levels of ambition and for different aspects of readiness, you can see the scores there. And what jumps out from there for me is, first of all, that technically, it looks like we're completely ready to go. It's technically possible, everybody thought, who participated in the process, to deliver even up to a high level of ambition for improving housing level and energy efficiency and reducing carbon footprints by 2030. However, when you look at delivery, the red section really jumps out, showing that people thought we were, you know, largely ready to deliver a low level of ambition, but less ready to deliver a medium level, and really completely unready to deliver high levels of ambition in terms of retrofit across the whole of the housing sector in Leeds. If we then break that down into different subsectors, so these are the results for the council housing sector. So Leeds has 55,000 council houses, excuse me, and here, technically, as with the sector more broadly, the view was that we're completely ready to deeply decarbonise those by 2030. In terms of community buy-in, people thought that the community, especially tenants, were largely ready to deliver or to participate and give their support to even the highest levels of ambition for improved energy efficiency. Excuse me. But there were limits to our policy readiness, and we'll explore those in a second. Excuse me a second. Excuse me. And also to our financial readiness, where there was an assumption that, or the view was that we were largely ready to deliver and invest in low and medium levels of ambition, but less ready to invest in the highest levels of ambition. And for delivery, like with the sector more broadly, there was a sense that as we move into the higher levels of ambition, that the supply chains and the skills and the organizations to retrofit those 55,000 houses weren't there to the fullest extent. And so we were largely unready to deliver significant decarbonisation. So from that, various action areas emerge. One was, in terms of national policy readiness, that whilst we have high levels of ambition at the city scale, that national policy isn't supporting that. And really, to move forward, we need a change in national policy and a clearer commitment from national government to reach the highest levels of ambition in terms of decarbonising council housing. Secondly, there was a view that we need to strengthen the business case for investment in higher levels of ambition. So whilst it may be possible to invest in low to medium levels of ambition of decarbonisation and retrofit amongst the council housing stock, the case for the financial readiness for investing in the highest level of ambition was lower. And then lastly, on delivery capabilities, there's a need to strengthen our capacity as a city to deliver, especially for the highest levels of ambition. So already we start to see some action points where the Commission or the city at large can start to target our attentions and to try and build our readiness so that some of these blockages are removed and we can get moving on a retrofit scheme. For housing associations, it was similar, although there were slightly lower levels of readiness amongst tenants and the community for higher levels of ambition. Otherwise, you know, it was broadly similar. So a need to strengthen the business case, that housing associations had perhaps less access to resources than local government to do this, and that was a more pressing concern. There was also a recognition that there was a need to support and communicate the benefits to society, to improve the appetite for change, especially for higher levels of ambition. There's a job to be done in persuading and convincing people that deep retrofit is a desirable thing. For student residences, this was one of the more positive areas, because it was felt that technically this was doable, that financially universities are able to invest because there's a business model there for them, that delivery-wise there are more skills for building large student residences, and that the student community would be largely ready as well to accept even a higher level of ambition. However, as with many other areas, policy, especially national policy, was seen to be lacking, and therefore there were calls for policy changes from the university funding sector, for example, to encourage more ambition and more rapid change amongst student residences. Private rented was more of a challenge. As with the other sectors, the view was that technically it was possible to do this, but that there was less community readiness, and that the financial case for landlords to invest and the split incentive issue came up here in terms of, you know, the landlord would bear the costs and maybe the tenant would get the benefits, and therefore that's a block to investment. The financial readiness was more restricted, and again, delivery was a challenge. So there's a real job to be done here in terms of creating the right conditions to allow the private rented sector to decarbonise to the extent that it has to if we're to meet our target. And then for owner-occupied, a similar kind of story, but maybe less acute than for the private rented sector. A clear view that some owner-occupiers who are willing and able to pay may well be willing and ready to get to a higher level of ambition. But really we need to think about what a retrofit scheme for the whole city looks like and how that can address some of the challenges that are faced by owner-occupiers, and especially the less willing or the less able to pay parts of the owner-occupied market or sector. And for new build housing, of which there could be quite a lot by 2030 in Leeds, again, technically possible, probably more possible to build new houses to very low carbon levels than to retrofit. But again, you can see that there's some level of appetite and acceptance amongst the community. But as with the other sectors, that readiness tails off as we get more and more ambitious, and that, you know, maybe there are no major blockages for new build housing, but that policy in particular could do much more to support higher levels of ambition and, you know, a move towards building net zero or very low carbon homes in the city in the next few years. So that was the housing sector. And you can see some common issues emerging, especially relating to policy and to finance here for higher levels of ambition. I'll just give you the headline results for the other sectors. For commercial buildings, and this includes offices, but also, you know, pubs and restaurants and hotels and cinemas and shops and so on. Similar kind of story, technically less ready to decarbonise, especially at higher levels of ambition, given the challenges in retrofitting some of the existing commercial building stock. And real barriers, maybe as you would expect at the moment in terms of financial readiness, given the impact of COVID and the recession on the retail sector and the leisure and hotels and restaurants and so on sector. Again, there was a sense that delivery was largely there, that companies could do it probably up to a higher level of ambition, but if everybody did it together, there was a sense that we weren't completely ready to go for the highest level of ambition. Some opportunities were flagged in this sector, one of the main ones being that people felt that there was going to be a lot of repurposing of retail spaces in city centres. And as a result, perhaps of people working from home more or living more locally through COVID, and obviously we don't know how permanent some of those behavioural changes are going to be, that there was an opportunity to repurpose some city centre retail spaces, and a view perhaps, for example, that shops would unlikely be on more than one story, and maybe retail space would have you know, traditional shopping spaces blended with online collection on the ground floor, but then the upper stories would be converted into residential accommodation. And that does create an opportunity to lock in low carbon standards when buildings are being repurposed. But there is a real economic challenge in terms of the ability of the commercial sector to make those investments under current circumstances. Similarly, for the public sector, on average, and this includes education and hospitals and government offices and so on, a similar kind of story, maybe without quite the same number of red roadblocks in the way, but also a lack of dark green. So there was a middling level of readiness and some opportunities to intervene to improve the capability of the public sector to decarbonise. Some of this is being addressed at the moment with money being made available through stimulus or recovery packages for investment in public buildings, but especially for higher levels of ambition, there was a sense that the conditions are not fully in place yet to allow the public sector to be that ambitious in delivering deep carbon cuts over the next 10 years. Obviously, austerity has an impact on that. And then to zoom in on transport, just to contrast that with the other sectors, transport was less ready perhaps than commercial or public sector readiness levels indicated. Same kind of stories, but when we zoom into individual areas, so one standout opportunity was around demand reduction, and COVID and working from home offers an opportunity to reduce the amount we travel and commute, and this means that various options are there. So could we do more to have either denser city centres with residential areas being developed in shopping areas, as we were just saying, or to have 15-minute neighbourhoods where people lived and worked and played more locally and therefore travelled less. So a real sense that that was an opportunity for us to do more and to make the most of, if that's not the wrong way of putting it, the COVID crisis and the temporary changes, and perhaps trying to lock some of those in for the longer term as we emerge from the crisis, hopefully soon. For walking, for active travel, same kind of issues emerged, but there were some real blockages here. And I suppose one of the lessons for me here was that actually promoting walking can involve some significant investment in more walker pedestrian friendly junctions, for example, and that could be a deterrent to really aggressively promoting active travel as we move forward, but also in terms of community buy-in, a real sense that people were willing to walk sometimes up to a point, but there were some people who were quite resistant to that, and certainly for longer distances, some real issues with getting public support and buy-in for very ambitious walking policies. Same kind of thing for for cycling. Again, where some of the infrastructure to properly enable a radical expansion of cycling in the city is quite expensive at times. The resources were not seen to be there, but also that some people, either drivers being anti the supposed impacts of cycling, or people being reluctant to cycle long distances, even with electric bikes. Some sense that community readiness wasn't fully there for the highest levels of ambition either. And certainly national policy could do more to support active travel, whether walking and cycling. For cars,
5 minutes, Andy.
Thank you, Tom. Involving investments in switching to electric vehicles or to low emissions vehicles. Again, you can see some level of acceptance among some people up to a point, but real barriers for some people in terms of switching, almost all of the vehicle stock over to EVs, that the infrastructure wasn't there. Technically, that sets up major challenges, that there are some delivery capabilities that are lacking, and the finances are not there too. So things we can do certainly, but also a lot to be done in order to get ready for deeper levels of change. For vans, for the commercial sector, was seen to be reasonably positive, with opportunities for some of the major delivery companies, for example, to really accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. But that various changes need to be put in place to enable that to happen, including to enable companies to invest at scale and as quickly as we would like. And for lorries, a real sense that there's a major challenge here in terms of the technology not being readily available either for electric vehicles or for hydrogen powered lorries. And you can see challenges across the board there. One opportunity here might be to establish consolidation centres, however, so that lorries delivering things into the city drop all of their packages and parcels and so on at a consolidation centre, and then the last mile is done by electric vehicle or by hydrogen vehicle or by active travel. So some opportunities, but also major barriers for the haulage sector. And for buses, also some financial barriers in terms of deep decarbonisation and replacing nearly all of the vehicle stock, but also expanding the number of routes and so on. A real sense that policy needs to change in order to get the finances to enable long-term investment of much more active bus or significantly expanded bus travel within the city. And for rail, whilst there is a clear opportunity, and this really brings home the timing issue, a sense that even if we got going now with a radical expansion of rail in the city, it's unlikely that we will be able to do much to change things by 2030. That there's a lead time to new train stations or new rail lines or changes in rolling stock and so on. And some of the time is already gone, which is really quite stark and alarming in terms of us delivering on the net zero target. And the same was true for mass transit. I mean, it's often said that Leeds is one of the biggest cities without a mass transit system. And a sense that even if we got going now with, well, whatever it might be, a tram system or a trolley bus system, that it's almost too late to do much by 2030. Of course, that's not to say we shouldn't do it. It's just in terms of us achieving a 2030 target, it either has to happen in the next year or two, or it's not going to deliver by 2030. And that there are some significant barriers, especially in terms of finances, to deliver mass transit across the city. So to start summing up, what this shows us is that there are some areas for low levels of ambition where we're largely ready. That may be for demand reduction in transport, or for vans and electrification of vans, or for student residences or housing associations and so on. But as we move into medium level of ambition, that we're less ready, as we've been saying, and for highest level of ambition, we're largely unready. And this gives us a fairly stark warning, a bit of an early warning system, if you like, to say, well, we need to address all of these reasons why we're not ready pretty quickly so that we get ready and then start acting quickly enough in order to deliver on our net zero targets. So all of that has informed a review of what the Climate Commission does, and we are restructuring at the moment to respond to these findings. So there will be a new housing panel and a new transport panel. And given that finance and investment is a cross-cutting concern, a new finance and investment panel too. And we will work with others to pursue similar agendas for commercial buildings and the public sector. Also, that there's a need across all of the sectors to engage and to communicate and to listen and learn, but also to persuade, I suppose, at times that there are significant benefits from climate action. And one of the phrases that came out quite regularly was about show, don't tell, and how pilot schemes, for example, in traffic calm streets or energy efficient buildings, can really demonstrate to people, and they can see for themselves and then opt in because they say, well, we want to live in an area like that or in a house like that. And the positive benefits could spread through the city, but we need to sustain our engagement and communications activities to do that. For the future, we will be extending this process to look at resilience and how ready we are to deal with climate risks, especially flooding and heat waves and extreme weather events. We will be doing that shortly, and we will be channeling all of this into the development of a net zero investment prospectus to deliver on the finance needs, hopefully, and to do that in an innovative way to connect people and their investments to low carbon projects in the city, for example, through green bonds. And then there are fantastic initiatives that Jamie's about to talk about, where sectors are picking up this methodology and saying, what do we as a sector need to do? And Jamie will tell us shortly about what the cultural sector, cultural industries within Leeds are doing to build their own readiness and enable them to act in a more ambitious way as it moves through the 2020s. So that's it from me. I'm happy to take questions later, but I'm also looking forward to hearing from all of our panel in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for that insight into the process. A very, very interesting way of looking at readiness across the city as a whole. So the Leeds Climate Commission is, of course, an independent advisory body for the city as a whole. I'd like to now call on Councillor Lisa Mulherin just to give a brief response from the city as a whole. What is the broad reaction to the findings to date, Councillor Mulherin? A few minutes from you, please.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andy, as well. Really good presentation. Obviously, heard that at the Climate Commission workshop that we did last week. From the council, this is really, really helpful. Helps us to see where we're at and how much further we've got to go. We've had some improvements in terms of funding streams from the government as a result of COVID, which obviously is helpful, but I think the scale of the challenge that we face is very, very clear from the work that you presented today. So just in terms of the couple of comments in terms of those areas of work. So in terms of housing in Leeds, we've got 340,000 homes in Leeds. 62% of those are owner occupied, about 19% private rented and 18% council. So only the 18% of that is in direct council control. We've been investing in our own council housing stock, and it's currently rated at C for energy efficiency compared to D for housing as a whole. We've got further measures that we're taking, investing in our council housing stock, and we've been linking up multi-storey blocks, for instance, to the district's heating scheme in Leeds, which not only improves the energy efficiency and carbon reduction, but is helping those households with their fuel bills as well. More significant challenges, as you've noted, in the private rented sector. As a council, we have demonstrated what can be done in two schemes in Cross Green and in Holbeck, where we have invested in measures in private rented sector houses to improve the energy efficiency of pre-1919 housing stock. So houses that were very cold, damp, and very difficult to heat. And the measures that we've taken there have shifted those from energy ratings of FG ratings to BC ratings. So it can be done. We've demonstrated that that can be done, and we've been using that to lobby government for further funding to be able to take that forward in other areas. We've also been working with charities like Latch and Canopy to bring older properties back into use as well, following extensive energy efficiency work. In terms of new housing, there's an ambition in Leeds to build 52,000 new homes over the next 20 years, and we're currently updating the local plan, which is our local policies to make those houses for the future more energy efficient, to respond to the climate emergency across all of the areas, not only in terms of energy efficiency, but in terms of biodiversity and the approach to building. And we know that we've got some really good examples of developers in Leeds who are showing the way and doing that already. So Citu being perhaps the outstanding kind of model there, showing that it is viable to deliver housing that is energy efficient and climate ready. So that work's taking place with the Development Plans Panel and CEAC. So those of you who follow the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee on our webcast will be able to see some of that discussion be moving forward. So also in terms of transport, we've done a lot of work, as you know, to try to make public transport more reliable, efficient and more attractive to the travelling public, as part of our work to try to get the mode shift from the private car onto public transport. We, as Andy points out, are the largest city without a mass rapid transit system. We're still looking to get funding and support to be able to deliver that. But in the meantime, we've been improving public transport through making buses more reliable with the Leeds Public Transport Improvement Programme. And more recently, through the government's emergency active travel measures, we've also been trying to make walking and cycling and integrating walking and cycling with public transport a much more viable option as well. With all of these measures, we do need greater support from government. We've seen areas of investment as a result of COVID. So there has been money for instance, the Get Building Fund, which we've successfully bid into to get another 100 private sector homes in the Holbeck area on a scheme for energy efficiency improvements. But all of these are kind of nice, small scale piecemeal, really, pieces of work. And what we'd like to see really is the funding that's currently sitting with the energy providers transferred across to council, so the energy levy, so that we can actually put that money where it's needed to deliver the change that we need to see in the city, and for the government to incentivise home owners. We've seen announcements today in terms of green investment opportunities from the government, but the scale of it is nothing like we're seeing in our European neighbours. So 5 billion for the UK this financial year compared to 36 billion for Germany, and I think it was something like 25 billion for France. So we're a long way behind where we need to be, and we need, again, unlike our European neighbours, we're a much more centralised country. We don't have the powers, unfortunately, that we would like to see in terms of public transport yet, although we may be getting some more of that with the new West Yorkshire mayoral authority that's being voted on next spring. So we may be heading in a more hopeful direction in terms of public transport, but overall we do need to see a much greater level of investment and power devolved for us to be able to deliver at the scale and pace that we'd like to, in line with the of where we're at.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mulherin. I'd like to move now to Andy Boyle from Otley Energy. Andy, would you like to give some initial responses to the findings?
Thank you for the invite, and I'll be talking mostly about retrofit of housing. But I do just want to make some general points, first of all, about the approach. But really, I think that the whole approach has been really valuable. I think the idea of getting people around the table to understand the challenges that we face together from different perspectives and from different areas of expertise has really deepened people's understandings of the challenges that we face. And I think my key overall hope is that, that this is the start of the process, and that process of collaboration will continue, because these are clearly complex overlapping issues. And so we do need that joined up approach to tackling them. And I think fundamentally, we really need the community at the table as part of that collaboration, because they're impacted by the things that we're talking about, but they have so much to offer to the process as well. And I think secondly, as well as that process, I think the actual structure of the CARA is important. That split between the technical, the policy, the financial aspects, because it helps us all understand them as multi-layered challenges that we're facing, and start to understand the relationship between them and how we need to tackle them. So on retrofit specifically, I think there's no better example of the complexity of what it is that we're facing in terms of readiness. And the reality is that we need to retrofit pretty much every home in Leeds if we're to reach net zero. And we're starting from a position where there just isn't any demand for retrofit. People aren't asking for it, and there isn't any supply really of the type of retrofit that we need, certainly at the scale that we need it. And as the CARA process shows, that there's lots of reasons for that, lots of overlapping reasons for that lack of demand and supply. So in parallel with the CARA process, we've been working with the Commission and with Leeds City Council, people like West Yorkshire Combined Authority, organisations like ARUP as part of a recent government report, and really importantly as part of the UK Green Building Council Accelerator Cities programme, which Leeds and West Yorkshire Combined Authority involved in as well. And that all of this is really looking at how do we unpick these issues and get ready effectively? How does the city mobilise itself to address all of these challenges? And it's about a strategy. I think all of these things are about a strategy. It's about a holistic approach, as is demonstrated by this CARA process, working across all of those areas. And I think to set the scene, that the Green Homes Grant, which people will be aware of, which is £2 billion of government money, is a good example of those challenges. It's nowhere near enough money. We probably need more like £4.5 billion per year for the next 10 years. And anecdotally, I'd say that people are struggling to understand the website and understand the measures that they should be taking. And if they do understand those, they're struggling to find suppliers because the supply chain isn't ready and aren't mobilised and aren't ready to act. So I think as well as lobbying government for the continuation of that kind of intervention and higher regulation, we do have to be getting on with things, I think, and that's really what this city strategy that we've been working with partners on is all about. And I've tried to simplify it into 6 key areas, if that's a simplification. And it's about, so firstly about that.
Really quick, Andy.
Oh, right, okay, so it's about the coalition coming together, treating it as part of a local energy plan. So we're understanding the whole energy system, not just retrofit. Developing a community-led one-stop shop business model that will make it easy for people to invest in retrofit. Working with the council on neighbourhood-based approaches, so going into the community together, and working with partnerships to fill those, to demonstrate the demand and fill those skills gaps, and working with people like the Green Finance Institute to develop the funding models that will make it compelling for people to invest in their own homes. So not easy, but I think a really enthusiastic coming together of people who want to tackle these things together.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. I'm sure we'll pick more of this up in the discussion that will follow. And please keep the questions coming into the Q&A as we go through. So Andy was talking there quite a bit about retrofit, but we've also lucky to have Johnny with us on the panel, who is of course one of the innovative new builders in the city of Leeds. So Johnny, would you like to give your response to what you've heard so far this evening?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think, I'll start by introducing myself and Citu. So Citu, sustainable developer based in Leeds, flagship project Climate Innovation District. We're a purpose-led business, and our purpose is around accelerating the transition to zero carbon cities. The way in which we do this is by actively trying to support the city, support Leeds City Council and Sheffield, where our 2 strategic projects are, by trying to, and I say trying because it's not easy, but to deliver a level of excellence in performance of new homes by creating a ripple effect. We're completely open to sharing and giving away the lessons learned and information. I think in sort of direct response to the sort of fascinating work of the Climate Commission that we follow with keen eyes as a company that is acclaimed, I guess, and committed to being doers, is the Climate Commission supports us with the relevant information and the facts and the figures. I think in response to this, I think we broke it down into 3 sections. One, I guess, is about strategy, which Andy mentioned previously. I guess the strategy that sits within Leeds, particularly in relation to new homes and how we're going to build it, it simply isn't there, in a sense that we as a house builder, property developer, are not told to do anything other than building regulations, which frankly are a long way away from being acceptable if we're going to tackle this climate emergency. I think where we hope this will, and what we hope will develop, is that it develops quickly. It needs to develop quickly. I think second, that what we need to do is it needs to be bold. I met the mayor of Stockholm about 2 years ago and asked him how he managed to deliver Hammarby. Those of you who know it, if you don't, I'd certainly have a look at it. It was completely developed upon strategy, and I think it's easier said than done. And I think what we need to do in Leeds now is we need to unite. We need to get the right people in the room, which I think the Climate Commission does on a regular basis. And I think we need to start really generating action. I think the second thing is about the plan. So strategy, plan, and then action. I think the second thing is the plan. As a developer in property, we have to deal with planning, and unfortunately, I guess we spend very little time talking about the plan with planning. We talk about lots of great stuff, and we have a great relationship doing new housing, but the agenda of zero carbon is, I don't think it's not understood, but it's not there written into the policies. We consistently, as a developer in Leeds, have to effectively break the rules to remake the rules. And I guess coming on to action is, as a developer in Leeds, we feel completely supported by Leeds, but simply the national policy, the national guidelines are not written to support really bold action that is going to create the change to accelerate to the dates in which Andy presented at the beginning. We've ended up being pushed into a model of vertical integration. We design ourselves, we manufacture a timber frame passive house system from our own factory, we erect ourselves, and we have a model for delivery on site, simply because the industry, as Andy's graph alluded to earlier, the delivery readiness in the industry, of a very traditional industry in property construction and housing, simply hasn't got itself ready. And I guess that's the purpose of the conversation today, is to continue looking at how we can accelerate and get these things ready. I think the solution is that we need to continue being bold as a city. We need to continue supporting one another. We need to not be pointing the finger, and we need to be all adhering to this, the principles of creating ripple effects by doing great things that inspire people to follow suit. And it's not as simple as writing a strategy, and it's not as simple as writing a plan. This is about people, change, accepting change, and doing it with some acceleration.
Thank you very much, Johnny. That's a very, very helpful perspective from one of our more enlightened businesses in the city. You were talking there about inspiration, and we're very fortunate to have Jamie Saye here from Saye, Sustainable Arts in Leeds, who've been applying this methodology to the cultural sector, which is struggling at the moment in lockdown, but is nevertheless still determined to play its role in addressing climate change. Jamie, do you want to talk a bit about how the cultural sector is responding to the climate challenge, and how CARA has helped you with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off with just a bit of kind of introduction to Saye and what it is. I actually work for Opera North, like in my day job. We are one of the largest, I think we are the largest actually, performing arts organisation in Leeds. And I met Phil Holdgate from ITV, who's somewhere on this call. So we met at a Leeds Climate Commission event. and we got talking about the things that were affecting us as organisations, and we kind of said, oh, there he is, saying hello in the chat. So we got talking, and we were saying, you know, isn't it interesting how the things that are affecting us as organisations, you know, we're affected by the same things, and we're taking the same actions, but we're doing it in a silo. So why don't we share information with each other? Why don't we try and learn from each other? So from that, we formed Sustainable Arts in Leeds, or SAIL. We formed that back in 2018, and then we became incorporated as a community interest company earlier on this year. We actually got incorporated as a company on the 16th of March this year, which was impeccably bad timing. But so what we do in SAIL is we meet regularly. We try and engage with the creative and cultural sector. We have negotiated a renewable energy deal for like a preferential rate for our members. We're in the process of trying to negotiate a waste deal for our members. We roll out carbon literacy training as well. So we deliver training to our members all around climate change and the science behind climate change and what we can do about it as individuals. And we offer this training out to free for all of our members. So round about now, there's about 50 of us, creative and cultural organisations, individuals and students from right across the creative and cultural landscape of the city, from, you know, small like freelance artists who are just like, you know, one-man band type outfits up to, you know, ITV Studios, for example. And as of yesterday, Channel 4 joined us, which is very, very exciting. So one of the things we are currently working on is the CARA process. So we want to be really taking tangible action. We want to actually be doing the real kind of carbon reduction actions and not just paying lip service to it. So we basically took the CARA framework and we applied it to our sector. And we invited as many people as we could to come and join us for the process. And I think we had, in the end, almost 50 people from various different creative and cultural organisations coming onto the call. And it was amazing. Like, you know, we have found that as a sector, I think we, for the kind of low carbon, like the low level of ambition, we're fairly ready. But for the high level of ambition to get to net zero by 2030, we really need to kick things into gear. So we're in the process at the moment of collating all of the kind of all of the learnings from that process and then applying them, which is at the moment it's on 7 pages and about 3,000 words. So at the moment I'm trying to like slim all of that learning down into some kind of tangible actions. So yeah, it's really exciting. It's a really cool thing, and yeah, we're going to share everything we've learned with everybody. It'll be on our website, which I'll pop our website in the chat. And yeah, if there's anything you're interested in and want to kind of get in touch about how this kind of model works, you know, how you can get people from different organizations together to band and take action together, I'd be more than happy to talk your ear off about it. So anyway, I'll shut up.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Jamie. That's really, really encouraging. Really, we're very fortunate to have such a dynamic arts and cultural sector in the city. So thank you to all of our panelists there, and to Andy right at the beginning for giving the introductory remarks. The Q&A session is going nuts. We're not going to get through all of these, but we're going to do as many as we possibly can. So I don't know if the panelists can see them, but I'm going to start with some of the questions that have been upvoted. So these are popular questions. So those of you in the audience, do please look at the questions in the Q&A and vote for the ones that you want to see asked, because we won't get through all of these, I'm afraid, but we will do our best to answer as many as possible. So many of the panelists discussed about the need for national policy to be strengthened for local areas. So a question, certainly Andy would probably like to respond to this, and I suspect Councillor Mulherin as well, about what's the Climate Commission's role in calling for changes for national policy. So Andy, would you like to respond to that, about the need for changes to national policy? And Andy Gouldson, sorry, I should say.
Thank you. I think it's absolutely our role to highlight where policy change is needed in order to give us a good chance of getting to net zero by 2030, which is our target. I think that there's a a major issue at the moment in the UK, and especially in England, because it's not necessarily the case in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland, where lots of actors are waiting for national government to act on things like retrofit. And the prospect of national government acting at some point is enough to deter local schemes from emerging sometimes, and that kind of policy risk, or the prospect of some national government policy kind of trampling over lots of local initiatives is significant. I would really like to see national government, instead of pursuing this in a very top-down and rather monolithic way, switching to a model where it facilitates and enables local schemes and learns from those local schemes. And then that would allow places like Leeds to be more of a leader than we are in terms of experimenting and developing pilot initiatives. And then, you know, at times, maybe this is a rather political point, I think central government has a rather patronising or dismissive attitude towards some of the things that are happening at the local level. And that's not correct. It should be the other way around. The bottom-up initiatives should inform national policy, and national policy makers should be driven by all the amazing things that's happening, sometimes despite national policy rather than because of it.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Mulherin, you mentioned national policy. Is there anything you'd like to add on this issue?
I think the key thing is that the government's target for being net zero is 20 years hence of the councils. So that, I think, lies, you know, that's where the issue really lies, that we're trying to move faster, and the government will need areas like Leeds to move faster just to be able to meet the national target by 2050. So greater devolution of powers and resources to do that work is essential, but also changes in policy. For instance, the funding that comes through from the Department for Transport that, you know, is based on getting more vehicles on roads rather than getting people onto public transport and into active travel. So there are things that we've already written and asked the government to do. And in the meantime, we're trying to move forward despite some of those obstacles. And I think Johnny mentioned earlier the need to be bold and ambitious, and that's what we're trying to do in reviewing our local plan. So trying to make our local plan climate ready, and we'll be hopefully leading the way on that. And we'll see whether or not the powers that be nationally want to try and stop us.
Thank you very much. We've got lots of questions, but yeah, Johnny, you did mention how Citu are often having to kind of work despite policy. Is there anything you'd like to add on this and add on to this? And then I am going to move on to another question. Johnny, I can't see, but you might be on mute.
Classic. I think what I would say is that we, yeah, we do work despite the policy, but we absolutely love doing so. And I think what I mean by that is that we all have a responsibility in this city to not just expect the city to be writing the local plan. We need to be driving that change. And I think what I mean by that we enjoy the work we do despite the policy is that we have a team of people who have a cultural drive to everything that we all in this forum believe in. And I think surrounding yourself with those types of people means that change can turn from an aspiration to the reality, which I'm hoping in cases we're showing in the Climate Innovation District. So we support Councillor Mulherin and the team at Leeds City Council to get into that point where Leeds is leading the way with the local plan.
Great, thank you very much, Johnny. Right, I'm going to move on to another question coming in from David Somerville here. This is about Nick Stern characterised the inadequate response to the emerging climate crisis as a market failure. So what's the panel's view on the need for system change, not climate change, as the driver for necessary changes? Can the market deliver? What other measures and framings might work? I'm wondering if Andy Boyle might like to kick off on this one, given that, you know, a lot of your work has been looking at this issue about how can we create the sort of the business case for climate action, particularly retrofit.
I'd start on a slightly different tact, actually. That I think we with our Otley 2030 work, we talk a lot about the relationship between behaviour change and system change, and that the two need to drive to drive each other. And I think that relates to this government policy level as well. That and this local action point. That I think we certainly can't be waiting for government policy. But we have to be demonstrating the demand for more ambitious targets. And I think that plays out at the business model level as well. That I think it's got to be, the system change has to come to make it easier for people to change their behaviour. But also I think there's a responsibility and a need for us all to start to drive that behavioural change to demonstrate the demand for greener ways of living and greener production of energy. And ultimately the community is going to have to be really involved in that system change if it's going to stick. So things like the smart meter rollouts, which have been a failure of a top-down exercise, I think demonstrate that. So I think it's change at every level, driving change at the other levels.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. Did anyone else want to come in on that question about the need for system change rather than climate change? If not, I'm afraid you're just going to have to butt in because I can't see your screens, I'm afraid. But if not, there's another question here from Joe Lawley about whether the government should devolve funds to cities that have plans for climate action rather than setting up their own UK-wide funds. And a follow-up again from David Somerville about the idea of local bonds. I'm just wondering whether Andy Gouldson would like to talk about local bonds as an idea, and maybe someone else might like to come in as well. But Andy, do you want to kick us off on local bonds?
Yeah, of course, just to finish up on the market failures thing, I think the readiness assessment really does show how the different elements feed off one another. The policy readiness builds market readiness, builds consumer buy-in, builds delivery skills and so on. And I think if you're too tunnel visioned in the way that you frame these kind of things, it can really be a problem. And sometimes economists are especially guilty of that. So only seeing the world through the lens of policy of market failure, I think, tends to kind of subsume or overlook some other important things, and that the systems approach absolutely is needed. When it comes to devolution, I absolutely think that with more devolved powers and resources, so much more could be done. And that's in a way exactly what I was saying. I think that give localities that are chomping at the bit the ability to experiment and to innovate and to do something amazing, and I think many of them will, and that national policy then ought to build on top of those innovations rather than anything else. So more devolution in the right context, of maybe a changed relationship between local and regional and national government, I think could be massively productive and a much more exciting way forward than relying on big monolithic schemes at the national scale. And when it comes to investment and funds, I think that our colleague Mark Davis at the university has done some amazing work on local bonds, and I've banged on about this at length because I find it really, really exciting, the opportunity for a bond to reconnect people to their city or to their town and community, and for people to invest locally and feel the benefits and live the benefits of their investments rather than distributing them to faceless, nameless places around the world and having no real connection. To me, maybe there's a financial benefit from doing that, I would hope so, but I think there's certainly going to be a cultural one in terms of people investing literally in their community and reconnecting with community. That could be hugely exciting. So I would be fully in favour of exploring the full potential of municipal bonds and community bonds and crowdsourcing of local initiatives and so on. And I'm involved in one here. I live in Harrogate. I live outside of Leeds. A community forest initiative, and it's doing all of those things, and it's hugely exciting and absolutely is changing the connection between people and place in a very positive way, I hope.
Very good, excellent. Johnny, I've got a vague recollection that Citu were using an innovative sort of crowd-funded way of kind of offsetting carbon at Citu developments, or am I misremembering there?
No, we set all our sites up as community interest companies because one of our fundamental principles is that people and communities are the first, well, certainly one of the most important parts of a sustainable place and community. And we, rather than doing within the community interest company that we hand over as a developer to the community once we leave site, they invest into that, and rather than paying a ground rent, they pay what's called an acorn rent, and we plant trees on their behalf to offset any of their in-use carbon. We also did a bond launch when we also set up our factory back in 2018, which we thought we wouldn't get much take up with it being about a purpose-led, all the things we're talking about today, and we had to turn it off after only 10 days because there was a national interest in what we were doing, which we were unfortunately shocked about, but it was exactly what we needed. So yeah, you are right, Tom.
Excellent. That's really encouraging. So hopefully we'll be able to do something like that. We've got more questions here from various people about the challenges of national policy, whether that allows Leeds City Council to develop a local plan that expects zero carbon new developments. There's various people who are answering that in the Q&A about the restrictions for local councils to kind of go beyond what is allowed in national policy. Councillor Mulherin, would you like to sort of explain that challenge a bit to participants that in how local policy kind of has to be slightly subservient to national policy?
So yes, we currently have a policy which enables us to go 20% above what's called BREEAM standards. That's kind of where Leeds can maximum go at the moment in terms of requests from developers. And I think, we have some really good examples, and Johnny's very clearly illustrated that this evening, of developers that will go above and beyond that and are showing the way and are enlightened and progressive. We also have a lot of developers who are not like that and aren't required through national planning policy to be like that. Our new local plan review, which we'll be going out to consult on early next year, will be bold, it's ambitious. We hope that we will be able to get support to deliver that, and it's because we're aiming to be carbon neutral, net zero by 2030. We are aiming to go above and beyond currently what's expected in the national planning policy. Whether or not we'll be able to get support from, for instance, the planning inspectorate when the usual high volume house builders wants to object to delivering such schemes will be the challenge, won't it? And that's the issue that we face. So it's not a lack of will, it's the vested interests in heavy industry, and whether it's to do with vehicles or energy production or volume house building. There's a lot of money and a lot of vested interests in doing things in the way that they've been done for a very long time. And whenever we try to do anything more progressive or bold, we're going to get pushback for that.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Good to know that the ambition is there anyway. I'm going to take Chair's prerogative now and just sort of get us slightly away from the built environment for a brief bit and bring Jamie into the conversation. Pauline Trussell was very inspired by what Saye is going on there, and just wanting to know how sales members knew exactly what high ambition was and how to achieve it in the cultural sector. Lots of people are interested and care, but don't have the expertise or the knowledge. The question just disappeared off my screen. Anyway, if you could just explain a little bit, Jamie, about how Saye adapted this methodology to apply to the cultural sector, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. I mean, actually, it's a really interesting point, because one of the things that came up during the session was around, we're talking about technology and do we think that the technology is there to deliver high ambition? And actually quite a few of the members were saying, we don't even know what the technology is. So that became part of the kind of our readiness, saying, well, actually, we need to be improving the level of knowledge throughout the entire sector to know actually what the problem is and how we deal with it, because we don't really have the language yet, like as a sector. And for a kind of sector that we feel our part to play in this as a sector is we can communicate this effectively. That's kind of why we exist, is to communicate and to still tell stories. And I mean, anecdotally, one of the most powerful things I saw was from Blue Planet, Blue Planet 2, where we saw the kind of the sea turtle with the plastic straw stuck up its nose, and then seemingly overnight plastic straws vanished. I just feel like the creative and cultural sector has that really important part to play, and at the moment we're not using that effectively. Sorry, going off on a bit of a tangent. So yeah, you're right. What we kind of did is we commissioned a student from the University of Leeds to create us a net zero by 2030 roadmap for the creative and cultural sector. So we kind of said high ambition would be we achieve absolutely all of that. That'd be, we've done it. 60% would be we achieve some of it, 40%, most of it, and then 40%, or the low ambition, would be we only achieve some of it. And some of it was a bit of a kind of, finger in the air guess. But even that, I think, where we feel we are was really important, even if we didn't really have the maths to back it up. And I think that it was a really, really helpful process, even if sometimes, one of our members was talking about ground source heat pumps, and another person was going, what are they? Which it was really good. Honestly, I'd really recommend it. It was really interesting. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Jamie. That's really good. And yeah, do check out the Saye website, and you can see everything that's going on there. Right, back to some of the questions. We've got a couple of questions here from Nick Nutgens, I hope I pronounced that surname correctly, not only about his family tree, but also about the supply of suitably skilled and experienced retrofitters, and whether there are case studies of good quality and successful internal or external insulation that would persuade people to go through all the hassles. So I wondered who'd like to talk about the challenge of upskilling the supply of skilled retrofit people. Andy Boyle, would you like to respond to that one initially?
Yeah, I'd say it sits as one of the greatest challenges, really. We, as part of the work that we did with Arup, we reviewed a lot of the retrofit schemes around the country, and the reality is that even the more successful ones, or the perceived to be more successful ones, aren't doing many retrofits. And one of the biggest challenges that they face is, as soon as they start to generate demand for retrofit, they run up against that problem of a lack of the supply chain. And it's partly the fact that the existing construction community are busy and have plenty of work on and plenty of demand, I think is a reality. But there's also the fact that they tend to work in silos. So this idea of a joined up approach for homes, which is necessary to really understand how you take a whole house approach. So taking the example of insulation, making sure it's done in a way that balances with ventilation, so you don't get damp problems and that sort of thing. That this is not, these are not, and all of the other things that interact in terms of retrofit, that this isn't a well-established skill set in the industry. So that there's a lot of work going into developing even the courses that will allow suppliers to be trained up, but we have to be demonstrating the demand to get suppliers interested in upskilling, and the colleges, because colleges are demand-led as well, so getting the colleges interested in laying on the courses that are necessary. We have to be demonstrating the demand of the supply chain. So a really important bit about that, the role of the council and the social housing is starting to drive that demand, to drive the supply chain and drive the skills environment as well.
Thank you, Andy. Would any of the other panelists like to come in on this issue of the supply chain and successful retrofit? You'll have to just speak, because I'm afraid I can't see your faces.
I'll jump in, Tom, on that one. Right. I think it is. I think if I reference the skills element to this, because I think that the skills gap in high performance new homes is as potentially as large as in retrofit, and we know that firsthand. And the model and the way in which we looked to tackle this was firstly identifying and accepting that we thought back in 2016 that the construction industry was broken when it came to being able to deliver high performance new homes as well as retrofit, which we've done a small proportion of. So it was about reimagining the model, and I keep going back to people, but the single most important thing was about engagement of people. It was about training, accountability, ownership. There's a very nasty cycle in construction where you do a little bit and you move on, and you sometimes get pulled back to it because you've done it wrong, or if you don't, then you've got away with it. And so our model is now that each home gets the team that we call the Citu squad, which is 2 apprentices, 2 joiners, electrician and plumber, who we classify as multi-skilled trades team. They meet the customer. They start on the house once it's once it's watertight. They get the building airtight to 0.6, and they hand that across to the finishing trades at the end, and they will also then have connection with the customer. The level of engagement by having that end-to-end process with those people, it's as much about upskilling and development and training, which is hugely important, because when we set out with this model, we employ them all direct, so they have consistency, they're bought into our values and our culture. But the value that we have seen in the accountability and ownership from end to end has enabled us to upskill them and train them in a way where they understand airtightness now, in some cases as industry leaders. And when we have stepped out, and we have done this in the last few years, back into the world of traditional construction, we realise why that model is so important. So I think my message would be that ownership, accountability, training is huge, and we have expended a lot of waste money by not doing the right training at the right time, but we've learned from our mistakes. And I think learning from mistakes is hugely important with what we're doing here, because it's about change, it's about new, it's about different, and the construction industry hates all of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Johnny. That's really interesting insight. So real emphasis on quality and customer engagement there. And Andy Gouldson, a couple of questions here from David Glue. Going more back about the process of the CARA workshops and so on. So how did you ensure that those contributing to the workshops had sufficient knowledge to be able to effectively kind of do the scoring bit that you talked about earlier? And then also, how were the particularly in the housing one, how were the different sectors kind of weighted? Was it by the market share? And what implications does that have about any kind of recommendations arising from that work? So yeah, couple of points there about how knowledgeable were the participants in the workshops, and how were the kind of results weighted?
Well, thanks, David, for those questions. On the first one, that they were stakeholder workshops rather than expert workshops. And whilst we didn't guarantee or check the qualifications or the technical skills of people participating directly, they did come from many of the main actors within the city. And even if they perhaps aren't so familiar necessarily with all of the technical detail, they absolutely do understand the challenges and the constraints and the barriers that they face in their day-to-day roles. That said, it's not supposed to be a representative process. It's you get a different set of people, you may get slightly different results, but these were the results from the 20 or so stakeholders that participated in each of those processes. And they are a little bit impressionistic and indicative. Whether it's 3 or 3.2 doesn't really matter. The point is that, from this, we get a story emerge of the main things that we need to focus on to get things moving forward. On the second question, sorry, Tom, just remind me the focus.
That was about the weighting, particularly in the housing one.
Yes.
Was it done by market share or by what?
In order to aggregate up from the subsectors to the sector scale, it was adjusted a little bit to take account of the different structural or the different sizes of each subsector. So if owner-occupied housing, I think I remember rightly, is around 60% of the housing market, and council housing is 15% or so, and then social or housing association is I think 4 or 5% from memory. So it was adjusted a little bit and weighted to take account of different sizes of different sectors. Yes.
Very much. We've only got time for one more question, so I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to everyone, but I'd like everyone really to respond to this. Oh, am I? Oh dear. Can you hear me now? No,
yes,
it's all gone.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
You can. Okay, good. Right. So the question I want to talk about is from Ian Sullivan about, and I'd like really a quick response from all the panel on this. Public appetite being there, but how can communities play an active role in making sure that that this works and that the transformations that we're talking about are delivered in a way that furthers social and climate justice? So a quick kind of 30-second response from each of you, please. If we could start with Jamie, please.
It's a really interesting question. I saw that come up and I was like, God, how am I going to answer that one? So yeah, I was hoping someone else would go first. Really good question. I mean, there's the kind of the smaller kind of actions. If everybody does them, they build up. So I come at it from the kind of engaging communities to take action, and I see like in the arts sector that there's a kind of like community hubs where people can come and learn things and do things, and that kind of small scale stuff ends up building into bigger scale stuff. I'm probably not answering this very well at all, so I'm going to pass off to someone else.
Okay. Thanks, Jamie. Johnny, did you want to give a perspective on this one?
Yeah, I'm with Jamie. It's a great question and very hard to answer. I think what we need to do as in answering this question is, firstly, we need to look back 5 years, if not 10 years, and we need to look at how the climate, what was called very loosely climate change 5 years ago, is now identified as a community as an emergency. I think what we need to do now is, firstly, before we go into community, we need to ask ourselves what we're doing personally. I think that then we need to understand how we influence that within our areas of expertise. I then think that the final bit to this is to continue these conversations. I think these conversations are hugely valuable, but I think what we need to do within our influence circles is ask what we're going to do about it. What's the solution and what are we going to do about it? And I think if we have the ability to jump forward 5 years, if we all took that approach and everyone was able to use their circle of influence as powerfully as possible and look forward 5 years in Leeds, we could do what we all have the aspiration to do, which is be leaders in the country, if not in Europe and globally.
Thank you very much indeed, Johnny. Andy Boyle, you give a quick 10-second response.
10 seconds. I think the successful lottery bid of Our Future Leeds presents a massive opportunity for putting communities right at the heart of climate action. And it's as much about community development and social justice and climate justice as it is about the net zero target. So massive opportunity for me.
Thank you very much, Andy. And Councillor Mulherin.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry, I've been in a few meetings over the last week with partners nationally, and people have said that we're leading the way in Leeds, and it doesn't always feel like that when you're kind of the front line trying to make progress on these issues. It doesn't feel like you're making the progress that maybe other people see that we're making. And I think others have already said we all have a part to play, and clearly there are different levels at which we can all play those parts. There's the leading by example, what we do personally, but also motivating others within our social work circles, community. And there'll be those that you know that can actually afford to invest and make a difference, both for their own households, but also in their local communities. Encourage them to do that. Encourage them to lobby government and us to do more. You know, if they've got money to invest in terms of crowdfunding and green investments, then so much the better. And just a final push. Our Future Leeds and Voluntary Action Leeds successfully secured funding from the National Lottery to create community hubs for local action in terms of tackling the climate emergency. And again, there might be opportunities in the community that you're based in to get involved in that. So that's something else you could do.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll try and put a link to that in the chat. And finally, Andy Gouldson, do you want to give us a final perspective?
I think there are 2 or 3 threads to this, which if they came together would be really powerful. One is, I think that we collectively need to tell a very positive story that people can get excited about and say that's the kind of house or life or city or community that I want to live in, and that people actively opting into that because they see it as part of a future they want to be part of, I think is going to be really, really important and powerful. And then it needs to become part of a new normal. I mean, you know, climate change can't be a sideshow. It needs to be a feature of everything that we do, and it needs to be normal for us to address climate change through all of the decisions that we take. Someone last week made a really, really powerful point about, you know, how easy it is for people to ignore climate change as an issue. And they said, you know, if we talk about discrimination or equality and justice, it's impossible for people to ignore those agendas now. And they have to be in there. And no one would question that for a second. And whilst people are getting to that point, perhaps with climate change, I think there's more that we can do and other things we can learn from other areas in order to normalize and mainstream climate action. And then lastly, I would say that pilot schemes have got enormous power to persuade people, and that maybe going back to the show and tell, you know, show don't tell story, that some little pilots that show what a traffic calm street looks like, or what a passive house feels like, or, you know, 101 examples of that people can visit and touch and feel and experience and talk to the people involved. That's such a powerful way of taking some of the concerns and the risk and the apathy out of this and getting people excited. But the biggest one I would say is that last one: get people excited about this and get them to opt into this as part of a positive future that they want to be part of.
Thank you very much. Well, it's just turned 8:30, so unfortunately it's time to wrap up. That's been a fascinating event, fascinating discussion, fascinating chat going on, fascinating questions and answers. I'm sorry we didn't get through to all of them. Hopefully in the chat there should be a message there saying where you can get more information on the PCAN website about everything we've been talking this evening. Can I thank all our participants for their excellent contributions, and Andy for kicking us off so expertly at the beginning. Lots more to do in Leeds. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and cheerio.
Thank you too, Tom.